Connecting. Great. Well, I am absolutely thrilled to be able to introduce you to Keith Mayers, who is a chartered coaching psychologist and a buddy of mine way back from when I was doing the master's program. We did the same program together, sat in the same classroom for many hours on end. And I've also stayed connected with you. Been so happy to be able to stay connected with you. You live the most fascinating and interesting life of no fixed abode, which would perhaps be relevant to share to people.
Sure.
But for now, I'm just thank you for coming on Moving Beyond Trauma.
Yeah, you're welcome. Pleasure, and thanks for having me on here, Kate. Good to see you, and good to have stayed connected for the last. I don't know if I want to say it out loud, but it's kind of scary to think how long it's been since MAPS EP. It feels like yesterday, but I guess it has been about 5 years now since we left that.
Yeah, we're like into our 6th year. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'm going to put it at that. I don't want to traumatize myself with that as well. There's enough trauma to discuss here already.
Yeah, exactly. So your evolution. So all of us have evolved since then, and I've been loving your evolution as the illness coach. And I just wondered, well, where would you think is a good place to start? How do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, probably my sort of gut response is to start off with the illness itself, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I should probably mention. Almost as a kind of a prequel to that, going back to when I was in my late teens, and I was at a sixth form college where I took up psychology. I did a psychology in A-level psychology, and actually, what triggered that was as a younger teenager, I was going through many years of therapy at a place called the Tavistock Institute in London. It was very Freudian, very psychoanalytic, and I had a lot of mental health issues as a teenager, which may be pertinent to this conversation too. So from a very young age, like about 13, I always had a keen interest in the human mind and what was making me feel and think a certain way. Psychology was very prevalent, which at that period of time for somebody of my age was very unusual, and that kind of led me to the psychology A-level. So it stopped after the psychology A-level. I was kind of talked out of taking it any further, people saying it's not really going to lead to much of a career or much opportunity, and then I ended up for years doing other things, particularly in sales. So now I'm going to fast forward to the actual proper beginning. It's now late 2010. I've been in sales for a number of years. In this time period, I was in a form of software sales to the disability industry in the United States. So I was living in Colorado at the time. That job that I had wasn't a particularly happy one. Sort of a bit of an effort reward imbalance, a lot of effort put in, not much reward coming out. So along with various job stress, there was a bit of burnout associated with that, and I don't know if that had any effect or impact on me falling sick in the first place. But Amy, my wife, who you know of, she was heavily pregnant. She was about to she'd just given birth to Logan, and Ariel, our daughter, was 4 at the time. And we were living in the NICU of Boulder Community Hospital, Boulder being a small town in Colorado, famous for Mork and Mindy and a few other things, and The Shining. And it was kind of around that period of time, just after we, Logan was born, and we were living in the NICU for 9 days. Noticed a earache, and it persisted for a few days, and I was just brushing it off as it was just probably just a mild infection, but it didn't go away, and it intensified, and weeks later it was still there, and visits to doctors and antibiotics and misdiagnosis, and eventually I needed to have a minor surgery which drained like a lot of fluid in there. But then the next day I was on a business trip in New York City and walking down Madison Avenue, and I felt like I was about to pass out. I knew it was related to whatever was going on in my ear, but it just felt it was like another symptom. I just felt very dizzy. I had to rush back to my hotel room and lay down, and I just started getting all these hot and cold, like kind of shivers and fevers. And then over the following weeks, back in Colorado, visits to doctors again, more antibiotics. Then I got diagnosed as having pneumonia because they found fluid on my lungs. And then after giving me yet another round of antibiotics, the symptoms were getting, the intensity of the symptoms were getting worse, and new symptoms were manifesting, covered in body rashes, pink eye, joint aches, fever still. I mean, I was really kind of falling apart. I was in a lot of discomfort. So now we get to late January of 2011, and we're at a point now where nothing's working. Amy starts to panic. She sees me just looking. If anybody's ever seen the film The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, I look like him after he turns into the fly. I just look terrible,
Right.
pretty much. And then she just forced me into the car and said, I'm taking you to the emergency room right now. The kids were with us. Funnily enough, I was like, hey, I'll get, I was telling her and everybody, I'm going to get past this. I'll get over this. This is, give it a few more days, but she was insistent. And finally, I stumbled inside there and was put in one of the rooms, and but we had an the head ER doctor, and then actually the head hospital doctor himself. They all came in and said, told me, what you have is very serious, and you may only have a few days left to live. And it could be one of two things. It could either be like a blood infection, which could travel to the heart, which could be potentially fatal, or it's this other disease, which, based on the sequence of symptoms, it looks very particular to that. We're 90% sure it is this thing called Wegener's granulomatosis, which since then has actually been changed. The name has been changed to granulomatosis, polyangiitis. It's a type of vasculitis disease, which is an autoimmune condition where the blood vessels swell and stop delivering vital organs, and leads to basically multiple organ failure, which I was on the verge of. So I was on the verge of liver, kidney, and lung failure all at the same time, and I needed to get a quick diagnosis and then quick treatment in order to save me. So fortunately, they were a very competent team. They got me the diagnosis. They started treating me straight away, but it did take 11 days in intensive care, and then 2 more years of, I guess you could call it, long-term disability with chemotherapy, steroids, and a whole slew of other medication to offset the side effects of those 2 main medications. And then, was breathing with an oxygen tank. It was a very kind of interesting, challenging period.
Oh my goodness.
12 years ago.
All alongside a newborn baby as well. Like,
yeah.
Oh my goodness, family life must have been quite turned on its head.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was, it was a lot to cope with. But as I've told a lot of people, I really think Amy was the one who had it tougher than I did. Because I mean, I'm not just saying that to kind of be falsely modest and to kind of praise my wife as you do sometimes. I mean, this, legitimately, she had it tougher, because I was, first of all, I was so drugged up that there was a kind of a blissfulness that I was experiencing. Secondly, I was being so well cared for, both intensive care, and then even when I came out, I was having counselors visit me. I was visiting various specialist physicians. I had an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist. I was getting a lot of attention at the time. And here's Amy, who's needing to support me, having just given birth herself, and then being the kind of work, the system that exists in the United States. She had to return to work. She only had a certain amount of time off, paid leave, and then she was running out of that, so she needed to go back to working nights at the same time as being a mum. And it really was, I mean, it was challenging, because it actually forced me to step up to the plate too, because she couldn't be everything all the time. I needed to take on some certain roles which a person in my state normally wouldn't need to take on, but I still had to take them on anyway, especially when it came to looking after the kids and just being at home with them and running of the house.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for, I always find it so proud. I've heard your like story of the Wegeners before and just, but it's such a big thing to talk through. So I really thank you for sharing
Yeah,
it.
of course. Yeah.
Again, I guess you've shared it a few times.
Fairly well rehearsed, so I'm told.
Yeah, the narrative is
Mm.
tight. For me, I'm really connecting with so when my husband had his brain tumor removed,
Wow.
like just what it was like for me.
Mm.
So we thought our troubles were with the older child who was born very poorly, and then we end up discovering that he has a brain tumor, so we go
Wow.
from Germany to London and he gets the brain tumor removed. And I was staying with my best friend from school. Amazing, these connections that suddenly, and maybe this is something we can go on to talk about, is the support network around.
Yeah.
Because I'm staying with her and I've got this sick child who was at that up to then the focus of our attention, and suddenly got James in hospital. He got very sick. He got bacterial meningitis. The removal of the brain tumor didn't go well. Whole bunch of complications needed. So first surgery was 5 hours, second surgery was 3 hours, yada yada. He stays in hospital for 2 weeks, and then just caring for him became this huge thing. And yet when I talk about like, oh, wasn't that time so wild, he's like, no, I don't really remember it like that. He didn't, like, it wasn't a great time, but he doesn't have a very like slicing memory. Doesn't remember. I will never forget.
Yeah, of course. Anyway, I've been on James's side of that, not on your side, but I could only imagine, but I mean, as you're talking, I'm putting myself in your position. I've certainly put myself in Amy's position, and I don't know if things were reversed. I'm sure sometimes you get no choice in how well you cope. You just have to. But the thought of it just seems very daunting.
I think that's really true. It's something my mum always used to say, was that you manage by managing. Because you don't, like, I couldn't hand my child to someone else. I didn't hand my husband to someone else. Of course I'm going to manage. But it did take something. So yes, wow. So what was like, because you got like, keep going then. What happened next, or what's the next part of the story?
Actually, sorry to interrupt you, Kate. I just heard a bang in the back, and I just want to make sure I'm just sending a message to my family chat. Okay, just make sure that everything's okay. The next part of the story is, so when I look back at that period, I don't know if James can relate to any of this or not. I mean, people look at me weirdly when I say this, but the next part of the story is like that. The following period felt like I'm quite nostalgic for it in a way, because yes, I was very poorly still. It was a long recovery. I was on all these medications. I was in a very fragile state. Like even just after coming home from the hospital, being quite a fit, strong, robust person, I looked in the mirror, took my shirt off, and I was just, I was just withered. I just didn't look anything like myself at all, and didn't recognize myself. So there's that loss of self. But I don't look back at it with melancholy or anything. I look back and it's like, well, yeah. I think the thing was, it allowed me to get to know me. There were a lot of pluses which I was paying attention to, and again, I'm prepared to believe that I was on a lot of drugs at the time too, and when I think about it, those drugs were also eliciting certain dopamine effects and highs in me, which maybe if I had not had that, I would have perceived it a certain way. But it got me out of a job which again I didn't enjoy. It was a time, my family and my extended family were not the best when it came to staying in contact and communicating. But suddenly everybody's now calling me out of the blue. I felt very wanted during that period. Again, there was all the commitment that I was getting, but it really, the person who gave me the most attention was myself at that point, because now I'm not having to drive out in commutes and traffic and go to an office cube and be around people who I probably wouldn't have really ever spent time with had we not been working together. It's like it became about me, and like a lot of, just gave me the space for a lot of introspection and a lot of sort of searching, and I think this is where I mean, there's so much more to it, and I'm trying to cherry pick the relevant parts. And
Yeah.
we probably need like hours and hours. But this is where kind of coming back to that prequel bit with the psychology A level and the therapy when I was younger.
Yeah.
It took me a few years to really think about what do I want to do with my time, because that became a question when you come so close to the end. You question, what do I want to do now? Like, I've just been given the second chance, basically. What do I want to do with this now? And there were a lot of different things, and there still are a lot of things which I'm always thinking, I still want to do this. I still want to do this. I don't want to, when I get to 90, I don't want to look back and think I never even tried this. But psychology was kind of at the top of that list, basically. I just thought I never really wanted to give that up in the first place, and I've always wanted to pursue that. And so this is kind of what led me on to, I think we're talking about 2013 now. So a couple of years, I really want to go back and study psychology. Ideally, I don't have the time, and I don't have the finances to go back and do a whole 4-year bachelor's. Plus I had a bachelor's, but it wasn't in psychology. It was in media and communications. I would like to somehow find a way to study this, to counsel people or to help people. And another thing which, part of my sense making of the whole illness was, questioning, why do people go through things like this, and why am I going through this? How do I kind of live with this? And I just figured, you things happen because you can use this to help the next person who's going to go through this, whether it's the same illness or a different illness. Yeah. So that's where there's like the helping other people.
Yeah, I was just, did you find that became an important thing to you? Or there's been a shift recently in the positive psychology world, as we talk more about not meaning so much, but what matters. Like, was that something that began to really matter to you, was to be able to help other people, or how did that kind of evolve?
It did. I mean, it just gave it a purpose. It just, for me, it was a few things. I mean, one was that it takes you out of yourself, instead of this sort of woe is me, oh, look at what's happening to me. When you sort of start to make it about, this is a lesson that I've been through, and now I can actually help other people. And it could be in a small way, like, I've been involved with Facebook message boards for quite a long time now. So, occasionally somebody in the Wegener's or the vasculitis group will post something, and this is my chance to sort of use that experience and shorten their learning curve. But also, I think I don't want to get too psychological, too theory based, because in case you've got listeners who are not into all that so much, but this is when like things like self-efficacy theory and self-determination, I think, and a lot of positive psychology interventions too, sort of emphasis acts of kindness or acts of kind of living outside of yourself, because I think it builds a sense of agency in a situation. I think that when one goes through an illness, and a narrative which I see in a lot of chronic illness communities is sort of like a learned helplessness with certain individuals. I think there's nothing more empowering and nothing that can induce more of a learned optimism than that ability to kind of take agency and help other people too. So
amazing. I love hearing you draw that thread through, like, the experience, that you're really taking us to there's many punchlines. I know your story is like way more than what you even just shared, but that you're taking us to this punchline of like how much that mattered to you to be able to help others, and how it still matters, how it's still something that you can feed back in. I was thinking, no, but you and me are quite similar in a way that we tend to often think about, well, what a theory springs to mind, and you think, oh, this is really cool. When you were talking, I was really thinking about the sort of 3 facets of meaning, which is the research of Martella and Steger. And coherence, I love, is such a big, like, how does it make sense? How do you make sense of what happened to you, what is happening, and what you want to happen to you? And coherence is such a huge thread. Like, are we able to build a narrative? Are we able to tell that story to ourselves and to us? Because in every story we cherry pick, like you were saying, we do that. In order to tell a story that's bearable to listen to, you must cherry pick pieces to take the listener with you, or if you're telling it to yourself. So I just love hearing how you're you're doing that, like the way that this story now, and it won't have been at the time, and I find that a lot with my clients who've been through significant, particularly event traumas, is that it's at the time the story doesn't hang very easily together. It's something that happens in retrospect, and that the concept of a spiral is really vivid. Like, you can return many times to a story, to what happened to you, and to the present, and each time it seems to make a bit more sense, or there's a bit more learning, or somehow it just coheres a bit better together. So I can hear a lot of that in what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, I mean, I know candidly that I sound, when I'm talking about my story, it definitely sounds rehearsed, because I have revisited and I have made sense and refined it over and over again. It's almost to the point now where this is just this story, or this sequence of, cause, effect, moving forward, the thing that I visualize in the future is it's so hardwired into me. It is my personal narrative, and it also ties in with what I read about and studied and practiced for my dissertation when it came to narrative coaching as well, and just kind of storifying negative, potentially disempowering experiences, and again, sort of creating a story that gives one a sense of agency and empowerment out of it.
Is there that sense of, I mean, like, for the people listening as well, like there's a sense that we could tell at any moment in time, I could tell my story in a number of ways, but there becomes an active choice about what one am I going to tell, what story is going to, like, because all of them matter, but which one is going to matter the most to me? Is there a sense of that in your work, and in your work as a coach, like you're supporting people?
Yeah, I think, I'm aware that, sometimes the story that I tell can, if I'm not careful, lose people, because I can sound very sort of academic and wonkish, and like, plus what's relevant to me can get very I can really sort of deep dive and kind of get quite quite intricate with this. And when I mentioned before we started recording about how I've had conversations with other coaches and other people from our studies, again, we can really sort of deep dive, but I have to be somewhat careful that in realizing that not everybody has the training or the background or the interest even. So certain things just need to be stated in just more of a relatable kind of way to a lot of people. I mean, I've built up a tiny sort of chronic illness community through another Instagram. For now, I call myself the Illness Coaching Psychologist, and I mean, it's a startup account. It's not grown a lot, but I've met various people who are coaches themselves, and they're a different kind of coach. They're much more geared towards health and wellness coaching rather than what we do. And it's a different world. But again, when I'm talking to them, I have to hold back from sounding too psychological. I can't, there's only so many times I can drop in self-efficacy and self-determination and locus of control and that kind of thing into the conversation before they lose interest, quite frankly. And
wow, it's funny too. I know when we're like observing ourselves at work, like what, but then when I talk to someone, my clients are often super interested in learning. I think there's lots of difference in ways of coaching, but with trauma-informed coaching, I do think there's a really powerful element of it is helping someone to understand some of the background processes, that whether that's neuroscience or polyvagal theory or psychology theories of efficacy, of resilience, of bounce back, so many worlds that we've done some of the deep learning in. And in a way that you can just draw forward that piece for that client, and they are saying, oh, this really makes sense now. Oh, I like to hear it from them. And they go, well, and also there's this one, and they're like, oh yeah, now I can hear something else as well. They don't have to do the however many master's programs and trainings and all of the rest of it. They're that concept of us as expert companion along the way, and I really resonate with that description, and I can really hear it in you too. Like, I'm not an expert in the client, in their story, in what's happened to them. No, they're the expert in that. But for me, my role with them is the expert in a ton of different knowledge that they could just pull out of me, like the way with Dumbledore or they do in the Harry Potter movies, and they take from their head a little silvery thread of a memory or an idea, and they can then go and look at it. And I just think, wow, that's often a very visual description for me of what it is I do. I just given a thread of an idea to someone, they absorb it in whatever way works for them.
Kind of like a personal reference source, if you like.
Yeah, I'm just this big library. Yeah. Okay, so this is a lot of the work you're doing, and you've got so many different threads and different projects you're working on, different ways that you're bringing your experience to life to help other people. What's something else you would like us to know?
So I mean, where should I get back to? Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of just finish off that that side of things. So I decided to embark on psychology. I really wanted to do it, and then it actually took me about almost 6 years after the worst phase of my illness and diagnosis to finally get into psychology again with these nice, neat narratives. It's nice it'd be nice to say, oh, I was sick, I got better, then I just went into psychology. It didn't happen that way. There was a lot of messiness, and it wasn't straightforward. I mean, money needs to be earned, and there were responsibilities, and we ended up having to relocate back to the UK, where I'm obviously from, in order to afford a master's education, because the United States is in my mind, is very cost prohibitive to study over there. And then even then, it was a challenge to get onto any psychology course without the undergrad. But finally, I actually got accepted into Birkbeck for their organizational psychology, because I did have a business background. So that's where I could kind of relate to the organizational part, and that was my segue back into the psychology part. And then even then, I mean, it was, I wasn't really clear what I was doing it for or how I would do it. But the study of identity loss seemed to be like a major theme, not just on that course, but like within Birkbeck itself. They invented IPA in interpretive phenomenological analysis. Jonathan Smith was the pioneer of that research method, that qualitative research method, and he's at Birkbeck. And so phenomenology and identity and lived experience is kind of like just ethos of Birkbeck, which when I would go to these seminars and the qualitative methods action days, I don't know what it was. It was like this language that just sort of spoke to me, and it became my language. And myself and friends from that course would go for drinks afterwards at bars, and we'd just be talking in terms of it was like I never learned a foreign language, so this was like my equivalent of learning a foreign language, which I could actually share with other people, but others wouldn't necessarily understand. But it did, for whatever reason, again, probably need another hour or two to unpack that, but it really sort of resonated with me. And then that's when that started to relate to the identity loss and the lived experience and the phenomenology of people with illness. I thought, okay, here's a language that I really love using, and here's a community which I've been part of. The two do match, and this is where my initial dissertation was about, in this case being organizational psychology, career identity loss, and the loss of self and the lived experience of that. So I focused on that and figured, this is knowledge and this is research which I can definitely use to help other people. And then after kind of getting the taste of that, I certainly didn't want to quit the academic study, and fortunately had the ability to carry on with another master's degree, which is where I met you. But coaching obviously does go hand in hand with organizational psychology. There was a strong overlap between the two, but it allowed me to expand not just career identity, but identity and narrative and personal story as a whole, which is then really kind of where I focused my attention. And that's where the whole thing grew from there. And then, while I was on that course, I used the access I had to some of these chronic illness communities to kind of reach out and say, I'm doing this course. I need a lot of practice clients. And as a result of my involvement there and the course, I was able to get a lot of practice at clients and a lot of experience kind of just working with people especially people who had Wegener's and vasculitis. But my wife Amy, she has narcolepsy, and so there are people through that world, and she had other friends, we had other friends who had all kinds of other, and I think I'm actually discovering that there's a lot more people with long-term and chronic illnesses around than we as a society even knew about to begin with. So I think whether it's physical health and the challenges that come about, but the emotional side, the mental health side, and the performance and the well-being is a byproduct of working with those physical challenges. That's where I'm seeing a lot of. So I guess this takes me to what is my work about, I guess, is the next part of all this.
Yeah. I love there's so much of my work is around working with whatever has happened with the person in the past rather than on it, which I always, for me, use as a kind of, one-liner definition between the difference of what I do and what I think that therapists do, who seem to really want to go back into those moments in time and to explore deeply some things that have happened in the past. Whereas in us coaches, the idea that there is also so much that is right with you, and we've had these things happen, and we need to have jobs and lives and families and move forward. So I'm really interested in kind of drawing out some of that from you, like what are some of the things that you find are really people love about moving forward, about what kind of things do you find your clients are always asking you, like?
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? I find my clients sometimes there are rarely people who take the opportunity to really kind of go deep, and I do leave it up to them. I mean, I let them lead. So with the people I work with, I'll start off the session just asking what they want to focus on, and the majority of the time it's something which isn't necessarily like a deep explorational self. I mean, sometimes it does get existential, or it does, maybe we do use some narrative techniques, but what I find a lot of is time management is kind of like a very fundamental thing for them. And so we're sort of working on that. I mean, there are times too where we work on things like limiting self-beliefs and goal setting and SMART goals, but the issues which the issues which I see time and time again, not just in the coaching sessions but just in the communications on the board, are things like anxiety. I feel anxious, and obviously, again, not being a therapist, I'm not really kind of going down the therapeutic realm of anxiety, but looking at something coming up in the future which they feel less confident about or anxiety about. And with people with illnesses, it could be just anxiety that their body isn't going to perform in a way that the task necessitates, or times maybe anxiety is related to they've had flare-ups in the past, and they're worried about getting negative test results again, and what's this going to mean about my future. Depression and anxiety, to me, I think are very interrelated, or maybe we're talking about despair, where it's just the feeling that I've lost hope, my life doesn't have the same meaning I once had. There's a lot of social comparison going on too. So, the idea that I should be at a certain place in my life at this age, and again, I'm held back by this condition or by my circumstances, and there are all these other people the same age who are getting on their career ladders and who are getting married, and they're where I thought I should be, which I think also ties in with self-comparison, like the idea of where you should be in your mind compared to where you are currently. And so, I mean, I've learned various coaching methods, but I would say at the top of that list, is much more so like a cognitive approach, because it's worked on me to some extent too. A lot of reframing exercises, simple tools which are just as they're simple, but they're still very powerful, like just scaling things from 1 to 10. So what I found with people I've worked with and myself is that we tend to always think in sort of absolute, either we catastrophize something or we romanticize something goes badly, everything's lost, everything's hopeless, or we something goes right and everything's going to be okay. But actually, the truth is that we reside somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. So
describe, please describe the scaling exercise, because I think that's a lovely takeaway. Like, just for I mean, someone listening to this may take away many different things, but that sounds to me is imminently practical. So how would I do a scaling exercise?
So let's take somebody who trying to think, somebody who perhaps in this case, since we're talking about illness, somebody who's got a condition or got an illness, and as a result, it's kept them out of work, and maybe they're struggling to get back into that workplace again, or maybe they just decided that career trajectory they were on was not for them, but they want to get into some new line of work. And so rather than do I have the talent? Do I not have the talent? Where do I start? And just thinking, this is hopeless. Is to perhaps get them to, assess on a scale of 1 to 10, where they are in terms of where they would like to be and where they are currently. So, I mean, I can use this with confidence too, or it could be using in terms of motivation. But in terms of, let's say, somebody would like to take being a psychologist, like what is that 10? A 10 would be, I would like to be a psychologist. What does that mean exactly? Okay, well, I would like to have clients. What kind of clients? I want to be a coaching psychologist. I want to have X amount of clients, maybe 20 regular clients. I would like to perhaps at least have a master's or be chartered or have a PhD. I would like to have gotten work published or even write a book. I'd like to be doing speaking events. So there's this kind of visualization of what that number actually means to them. And let's say that you ask, okay, if that's the 10 out of 10 scenario, you're this lecturer, teacher, professor who's published and has these clients, where are you currently? Now, if you ask somebody just the normal way, well, I'm nowhere near that. I don't know if I've even got the talent. It sort of creates a sense of hopelessness, and what's the point? But if perhaps they have an interest, maybe they've read a bit about it, or maybe they've done some other mentoring or coaching in some other way. Maybe they have some academic background, an undergrad that can be related to that pathway that they want to go on, or maybe they've identified some strengths or some skills within themselves which can actually carry through to that. I used to be a personal trainer long before I was also a sales coach, long before I was an actual coach. I mentor a lot of people in sales jobs, and these are things at the time you think, this is not necessarily relatable, but I've learned along the way that if you've got enough ingenuity and flexibility of thought, everything could be made to relate to everything else in one way or another. It's kind of like 2 or 3 degrees of separation, if you like. So suddenly, kind of using that line of thinking, maybe they're at a 3 or a 4 out of that 10 at 1 to 10 scale.
I love that idea. So they're scoring themselves, first of all, visualizing into the future and what that would look like. And if it's an 8, what would make it a 10? Or I love those I'd use those like, well, why is that an 8, not a 7? Or, you can really have a lot of fun around the sort of, where do we get the number from? And does anybody ever give themselves a 10? Like, is that ever never going to, because lots of people have well, no, 9 would always be my top. All right, well, why? And then, but then also to score right now. And I find that can also be quite a challenging question for people who are, that's more uncomfortable to go, what is it like right now? And to tell the truth to themselves about that. It's their truth to themselves. But then I love how you're bringing in the cognitive sort of exercises around, like, what is truth? How do you know that that's true? Where else can you find evidence for this or information about this in your life? So it's like really a vivid. So yes, it looks on one hand really like, well, you're just giving it a number. But on the other hand, no, we're really feeling like, what does that number mean? What is it? Is it a sliding scale? Is it a circle? I work a lot with spiral, like it was saying, is it a spiral? Is it a circle? Is it a straight line? Is it, is it got forks going off? I suppose you can really begin to expand this.
Yeah, I mean, it can. sometimes it can get messy, and we can go off in all kinds of directions. And obviously, part of being a coach, in my mind, is sort of being able to kind of it's kind of bring things back to kind of to a focal point. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like what it means, and sometimes there are instances where, well, new ideas come about from it, and new goals come out of identifying that start point, and what that other goal ought to be. I mean, like, the conversations are never, what I'm saying, they're not always linear. It's never a case that they, we could have had this straightforward trajectory. Other things do manifest sometimes.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Wow.
but it is. But what I found in general is it does help people. It gives people hope. I mean, I think it gets certain people more grounded into reality, and that's more of a hopefulness rather than sort of bringing them back down to earth again. And rather than again thinking in terms of how can you get from, let's say, a 4 to a 10, then it's more about what can we do to get you to a 5 or a 6. And it can be simple action items, like more courses, more reading, listening to a podcast, more networking, joining a group, a peer practice group, whatever. I mean, very, very simple things, which when compounded can take you from that 5 to a 6 to a 7 before you know it. But the other thing which I've learned along the way is the correlation between what I would call anxiety, feeling depressed, and feeling motivated, how it all correlates to the options that are available in somebody's mind for them. So what I've seen is people coming into conversations with me where they feel like they are out of options entirely. Again, it's like sort of learned helplessness. It's no good. It's just the way it is. It's very much like fixed mindset kind of thing. And they're definitely they echoes a feeling of depression or despair, hopelessness in them. If they feel they've got one option, let's say, if I don't become a psychologist, I've got nothing else. If I don't get this job, or if this person, on a romantic level, if this person won't go out with me, then I'm never going to find anybody. It's like when we hinge our hopes on one outcome, which again I see in various individuals, they tend to get very sort of uptight and anxious about it. But then when they start to realize that there are actually multiple options that never even got thought about and which are possible, then I'm noticing optimism and motivation kicking in. Like I've got a plan A, B, C, D, E, in some cases all the way to plan I. It's like, wow, all of this is possible. Why did I never know about this before? And I've got everything to go for now. So again, there's a shift there, there's a motivation and an optimism that comes about.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Like, it's the whole moving beyond. It can be very difficult to kind of explain to someone who's stuck in the stuckness, who's experiencing the negative, all sorts of different negative things, and there's to revert to creativity and to exploring and to playfulness and to fun, always, like, without minimizing what has happened. But on the other hand, like you were saying earlier, you're going to move forward somehow. So how about it's fun? How about it's playful? What would it take? Other sort of Brené Brown stuff around, when we can connect with our creativity. Like, so much we just, your shoulders come down, the playfulness, your chin comes up. It's like, well, all right then, what what else could I do with this? So no, I love how you've drawn that thread for us all the way through. And I know we could probably do a series, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. This is actually one of my barriers, my personal barriers, actually, is related to what you just said, because I mean, Amy's not my wife is not a psychologist like we are, or a coach, but as a result of being around me and proofreading a lot of stuff, she's learned an awful lot. And she and I on occasions should be getting on with work, but we end up having a coffee and just discussing, talking like this, and it goes on for hours. And it does. It's a blessing and a curse. It's lovely to. It's fun to talk this way, but sometimes sometimes we can get to lunchtime and it's like, okay, we've got to get something done
Got to
now.
do something now. Yeah, I think that's the joy of the podcast thing, is you can pause it and listen, keep listening to us later. I was just wondering, how could people find you?
Well, I mean, we're still in the infancy of like expanding our social media, but right now on Instagram, I am under Illness Coaching Psychologist. For YouTube, under Illness Coach. Illnesscoach.com is our website as well. So those are the three main ways. But obviously, if you know anybody who comes to you first, feel free, if they have an interest, to pass them on to me. But those are the ways right now. We are, again, there's a lot of moving parts to what we're doing. We're producing an online course, which where there's video and audio and a workbook, and it's taking longer than we wanted it to. It's
Everything always does.
Yeah, it's a real labor of love, but
Yeah.
it is for people with long-term illnesses, and it's much more along the acceptance and the self-management side. There are other courses which are in the pipeline to do with finding meaning and post-traumatic growth, and various other things, other ideas. I'm writing a book as well. So there's a lot of things which are diluting me, and I am wondering whether I should just focus my attention on one thing, but then I also get FOMO if I feel like if I'm neglecting anything else. Social media
what I'll do is I'll get the links from you for the various things, and I'll put them in the show notes and stuff like that, so people will be able to find you. And I just look for, maybe we'll continue the conversation another time, and for more we could, or perhaps when you've got some of those materials ready to go, that would be an awesome
absolutely
to come back and tell us more about it. But for now, just thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, that pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Kate. It's been a pleasure talking, and again, be fun to carry on this conversation at a later date.
For sure. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Bye-bye.